It's actually pretty easy.
You ready?
I'll give you a thumbs up when it's done. Okay, you're live.
All right. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Thursday, August 11th edition of the White Cliffs Committee pursuant to Senate Bill 2985 as amended, a bill to extend certain COVID-related amendments to the open meeting law as modified by Chapter 22 of the Acts of 2022, permitting remote meetings and participation until March 31, 2023, signed into law on July 16, 2022. This meeting will be conducted via remote participation. No in-person attendance by members of the public will be permitted. This meeting will be live streamed, but will not include public participation. All right, welcome. And unless you've got any introductory remarks, John, or you want to just get right into the agenda?
Yep, unless you want to do approval of minutes first.
Yep, let's hit with the minutes. The one question I had on the minutes was it says Diana wasn't here, but I thought she was here.
She was on the boat, right?
No, this is not last month's meeting. It's the meeting 2 months ago.
Oh, so she wasn't
Yeah.
here.
We got a little behind on
fine.
the minutes, so we're still trying to get caught up a little bit. So
It's
we're
fine.
no, I understand the confusion. So we're trying to get caught up.
So then do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion to accept the meeting minutes of course, I forgot the date. Last meeting, the June meeting minutes.
June 23.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Meeting minutes.
We'll also do this as our opening roll call, since I forgot to do that. So, all right, to approve the meeting minutes, Norm,
Yes,
Julianne,
Yes,
Tom,
Yes,
and I vote yes, so that carries. All right, now we go on to the meat of the program. John, I will turn it over to you.
Well, all I'm going to do is we have on the agenda today, we've got a few things that our consultant, Brett Pelletier from Curtin Company, as you know, was selected to work with us with the RFP. So he wants to review the submissions and have a little discussion about the data, some of the homework stuff. So actually, I'm just going to turn it over to Brett to take us through that.
Great, thanks very much. Welcome back to the discussions, and I'm glad I'm here speaking to you again, because we're taking this ball down the field, as it were, which is always the exciting part of these engagements, is really the making of the progress, which is a lot of fun. So I wanted to just go briefly through. I had given you some homework, which we'll get to in a minute. But first, I just want to ask if anyone has any questions or comments before we get started on any of the work that we're doing.
this is just a little detail thing, but I about 5 minutes ago sent you an email with another potential contact.
Mm-hmm. A local developer, right?
I'm sorry?
It was a local
Yes,
developer.
yes,
I
yes.
got it, and thank you very much, and I'll add that to the list.
Thanks.
The sort of earnest poking and prodding is going to begin next week after hopefully the results of today's meeting, where I can share some more specifics, and I'll just give you an indication as to why that is. We want to be as specific as possible when talking to people, and I don't like the idea of going to a developer or a user or an operator and saying, I've got this mysterious project coming that I can't tell you too much about, and I can't tell you exactly what the deal structure is going to look like, or how we're going to approach it, if it's going to be a lease or a sale or a joint venture or whatever. And so I think if we refine today a little bit, that'll be a great, those conversations will be much more fruitful. So that's great. And I've gotten some emails from others as well with some names, and Norm, I've got your list from the Dropbox. So that segues into the data bit of the exercise. I received a good amount of information from various sources of various flavors, some photographs, some old reports, some of the newer environmental reports that were up on there. If there's anything else you've got, if there's anything else you can think of, if there's anything else you think I should chase down, it might be somewhere floating around from an old consultant or an old contact, please let me know. You can email me or just stick that stuff in the Dropbox if that works for you. That's sort of a rolling thing. If you find something, stick it in there. If something comes in the door, I don't know if you've got any ongoing work. I know we had talked about some environmental stuff and also some site work, site plan work that was potentially being done in the future. Certainly put that in there. I wanted to, so that's on the data side. The homework assignment bit, most of you have sent me formal either emails or submissions or comments. Before we get to the results of that, I wanted to just open it up to see if anybody had any comments or questions or observations or, stairway thoughts that since last we spoke about this and since last you responded. Excuse me. So that we can kind of prime the well a little bit for this discussion. Does anybody have anything that they want to talk about in that regard? And this was the criteria, basically where we're going. The questions I want to know and we need to answer are, what are we asking for in this RFP specifically? And what are we expecting to decide on? And how will we go about doing that? And so that was an effort to prioritize the criteria that you all, who will be the decision makers on this RFP, find to be the most highly prized or the top priorities.
Well, I did set Brett about an hour ago some questions. To be honest, when I started looking at the criteria, I realized how little I knew about what the criteria would be. And this is something I just sent off to, we don't have to discuss it, but just so we're all on the same page with what I sent Brett. I'm not sure if we're looking at something called Preservation Light or something else, because when I read the Preservation Light information, it doesn't fit what I thought we were doing. So these are the things I'm trying to understand. Is someone gonna, and this is just a short list I put together, is this include upgrading fire, electrical, plumbing, and HVAC? Does this include removing all the 1960 additions? Is an elevator part of this? Are we considering kitchen upgrades or caterer's kitchen? Should the stained glass windows be reinstalled for this part of the effort? New construction, is that part of this effort? I'm working under the impression that when we're done this activity, we're gonna have a functioning facility. And if you read the Preservation Light option, it is not a functioning facility. So the main thing I got when I looked at the evaluation criteria is that I'm not sure where we are and where we're going yet.
Yeah, and that's exactly, I think, a great starting off point for this discussion. The results of these sort of synthesized opinions that come from everyone on the team actually sort of feed into, or they influence, deal structure. And that's why deal structure is so important. If you don't know what it is you're going to be actually asking for at the end of the day and deciding on, it's hard to know what to ask for all those little bits of information in advance, right? So figuring out, is the priority, is the idea that we are going to dispose of this asset in the traditional sense of it goes to someone else who will be responsible for doing all of these things, and we will be the municipality and the holder of an easement likely, and other things.
Well, can I, through the chair, can I kind of maybe take a stab at something here, and then because we do need to kind of flush this out. So from my perspective, a good scenario for us would be that the town retains ownership of the facility and the parcel, that we enter into a long-term lease with a private sector operator who would come in and renovate the building following the preservation light sort of approach, which means we're not taking it back to its former glory, but to bring the building back to a functioning, preserving the streetscape and as much of the historic building proper as we can. Okay, so we partner with somebody to come in. We'd look for them to do that renovation work. And I'm assuming that they're going to want to know how we're going to deal with the funding gap, because it's unlikely that we're going to have someone coming in that the economics are going to be such that that works. So what does the town bring to the table in that sort of a scenario? Well, we have funded the acquisition costs. We've done some maintenance costs. In an ideal world, we would lease it to somebody for a nominal amount, and they would basically spend their money to renovate it for some use, more than likely, a hospitality event. And there may be some funding gap that the town is involved in. I would anticipate we would offer a tax increment financing agreement, which for those of you that aren't familiar, it would be a break on the taxes for any improvements that are made on the facility for a period of time up to 20 years. We have that authority. So, that's one thing. And again, that's not money that we, in a way, it's foregone revenue, but it's not money that we'd have to bring, out of pocket. Whether or not the CPA is a funding source, ARPA is a funding source, grants, all that stuff, that's the gap that we would be trying to fill. But I guess, again, coming back, so in an ideal world, I think the town retains ownership. We enter into a long-term lease with somebody who will come in, renovate the place, tear down the additions, do a preservation light, get it up to code and back functioning. As part of that agreement, and I know this is something that's near and dear to Julianne, is that in that part of that agreement, the town would retain some rights of use, either a certain number of nights a year to hold an event, or whatever that arrangement might look like.
John,
I think, go ahead, Todd.
I was just going to say, I agree with everything you've said, but why are you leaning on the lease as opposed to a sale,
Well,
which gets you the same kind of things?
Yep, and I was going to say, where I was going was, the second option would be to sell the facility outright, which is another approach. But Todd, to answer your question, is my sense is, and this is something that we need to discuss, is that the community, has sort of may want to retain some ownership right to it for use and control.
And
If not, then
my only, and Brett can help us with this, we can get all of the things that you and the town want, we can get through either a lease or through a sale. It just may be easier for the buyer / applicant to get money for the project if they own it as opposed to a lease. That's all.
Yep, and so basically that's kind of what I was trying to do, was frame it up as those are sort of the two main options, and maybe Brett can shed some light on some of the pros and cons.
Yeah.
But again, the idea of the town, by the town retaining ownership, and this can be looked at as a pro or a con, then the responsibility for that facility rests with the town and not somebody else. So, but there's all sorts of ways to structure that deal.
I have a question about those arrangements. So when the town purchased the building at town meeting, there are certain constraints with CPA funding, correct?
Yes.
How would a sale even look? That's like going back and starting all over again.
It would be some of the stuff we've talked about. If you sold it, we would have to retain a preservation restriction, and the town would probably be the holder of it. If we do the lease back thing we're talking about, then we're probably going to need to find a third party to
Correct.
hold the restriction.
Correct.
Okay,
I guess what I'm trying to help funnel down here, the discussion is, how strongly the committee feels about retaining ownership and leasing or selling outright. And I don't know if there are pros and cons to those options, Brett, from your perspective in terms of marketing.
Yes, there are. So a couple of things. Todd's right. Generally speaking, the more complicated the deal structure, the harder it is to finance. Ergo, if it's a simple fee transaction where you sell the piece of property, it's an easier exercise to finance, generally speaking. What that usually means is, and control, municipal control, or access or something is a benefit, a perceived benefit that you would, it's the only reason why you would do it, right? You benefit from having additional control over the redevelopment or the reuse or the utility of the property. In almost every economic situation, you have to give something up in order to get something, right? So you're going to benefit from additional control or oversight or access or use. And there, generally speaking, there is something in exchange for that. Usually speaking, the reduced utility or the reduced accessibility or the reduced financeability from the owner's perspective or the leaseholder's perspective is sort of if they were to buy it, they don't have these restrictions. If they lease it, they have these sort of encumbrances and these hurdles to overcome. That's worth something usually to people, because if they're unable to finance it as easily and at good rates, if they are unable to access certain financing streams, grants, tax credits, et cetera, as easily, that reduces the financial feasibility.
So Todd, if you can, through the chairman, Brett. So what are your thoughts on, in terms of accessing financing and funding sources like state, federal grants, CPC funding? Is the town owning it more favorable or not, or does it not matter?
Usually not. The municipalities have access to certain funding streams that that private for-profit or let's say for-profit entities do not have access to. But generally speaking, it doesn't push the needle into the realm of cost benefit. It generally speaking, that's been my experience, is that municipalities, this is the conversation. It always starts with, well, we've got this thing, we want to hang on to it, and we want to make sure there's control over it. And we try to pick apart what that feeling is and what that desire is. Is it a desire to make sure that the property is developed or used or treated in a way that is consistent with our sensibilities about the historic nature of the property? Well, then you can achieve that goal by putting an easement in place. And you hope and pray, and like everyone does, municipalities and nonprofits and federal government, do these sorts of easements, that the enforcement and the work that's done does achieve that. At some point, the length of your lease gets so long, it's basically like you've sold it. And so the question is, what value do you achieve, or what benefit do you receive from this extraordinarily long-term ground lease that you're putting on this property? The control and oversight and access may be less than you think it is.
So along those lines, then, again, if I may, one of the things that the town would need to think about then is, under the lease agreement, the concept is that we paid for the initial acquisition. And so the person coming in wouldn't have to finance the acquisition, only the renovation portion. If we sell it outright, then I think we would be probably looking at selling it for less than we paid for it in order to make this. Because that's what we would bring to that deal in order to subsidize the renovation potentially, right? Because if we're going to sell it for market value, we already know how that works. Nobody wants it. That's how we wound up in this position.
Right, but also think through a long-term lease. Do you imagine in 50 years that you will ownership will revert back to the town, and now you'll have an asset that somebody put a tremendous amount of effort and that's
Well, we have
usually-
that happening right now with the 4 West Main Street. It was a 40-year agreement. The developer came in, rebuilt the building, managed it for 40 years, and this year it comes back to the town. I'm just saying that that's an example. Whether or not we want to do that here, I'm not advocating for either, but you know, there's precedent for both. Again, we
know
want
the-
what's
I don't know
most
the details of-
advantageous, I guess.
I don't know the details of that property,
Yeah.
but I would imagine that it's less hairy than an entertainment and hospitality venue that's going to require a tremendous amount of outlay. So that's good to think of. That's good to understand. And usually, if you're thinking that you're giving away, you're not taking a lease, it's a nominal lease payment, then the sale value is nominal as well. I'm interested to learn more about 40 Main Street to understand what the details are of that. But
And again, I'm not advocating that we replicate that.
Yeah.
There's pros and cons to
I would-
what that deal was, but
I would say if I'm a developer or an operator and the deal is 40 years and then it reverts back to the town, there's a much smaller pool of people who are willing to do that. You got to make sure you make your money back in 40 years or it's not worth it. And I'll just say, I think somebody asked if there's a marketability delta in this. And my experience is there is. And I will just give you a very simple example. We were working with a family that had a legacy asset in the Back Bay of Boston, and it was going to market. And half the family said, "Well, we'd like cash flow for the next 100 years. You know, can we do a 99-year ground lease?" And we had 20 initial bids for sale. And when we went and said to those very well-heeled institutional investors and developers, said, "What would you think about a 99-year ground lease?" Half of them said, "I'm not even interested. Don't even scratch me off the list because it just does not fit into our business model. We just do not have a way to finance that effectively and efficiently." I'm not saying that you're going to lose half the pool, but there are just some people who a ground lease is just not something they're interested in.
Okay.
They wanna
So
buy
then
it,
if we
they wanna
did-
control it.
if we
Yeah.
did sell the place outright, then I think the committee and the town would need to think about what part of what we would bring to, I would think, to that deal to make it viable, because it wasn't on just a straight market sale,
Mhm.
is forgiving or selling it at at something less than what we paid for it.
I think
Whether or
that's-
not that's a 0 or 50%, I don't know.
and I think
But it seems like you'd be
Early-
looking for that.
absolutely, because I think if you go into this and you get a bunch of responses that say, "I'll give you $1 for it" or $10,000 for it, you're going to be insulted. But understand that is likely going to happen, because that is a financing structure. That is a way to plug the hole. Zero acquisition cost means you don't have to spend as much money out of pocket to develop and fill a
And this
capital.
is happening to our friends in Shrewsbury right next door right now, right? There's that school that they're unloading that they on Maple Street, where they put an RFP out and they accepted one for $1, right? Because the developer came in and said, "We're going to do all of these things in improvement," and the town had all kinds of crazy plans and requirements for it. And the developer said, "Well, I'll put all that in there, but I'm only paying $1," and Shrewsbury accepted it. They're getting some backlash now, some signage around town that says maybe this was not the best idea, but that is what they did.
And you can also look at that you are a municipality, so the upfront capital cash you receive in a sale, or lack of, is generally offset by achieving a certain goal, which is getting the property back in active use, potentially longer term look at revenue from taxes, and an economic benefit, connecting the downtown center, et cetera, activation of the neighborhood,
In the historic preservation.
historic preservation
itself.
and investment, period. Investment in the community, because some of that is going to flow out in general. It's a very similar. I work with a lot of communities who have land for affordable housing, and when they go out to RFP, they say, "Well, we bought it through the land bank for $1 million," and I say, "You're not going to get $1 million for it." what you get for your $1 million purchase was you get affordable housing in your community. That's the benefit you've bought. You're not going to get a dollar for dollar exchange on the land value.
Right.
So you sort of think about
So-
it in those terms as well.
so
You're
conceptually-
getting benefit, but
So conceptually, what the town would get out of this for its CPC funding is the preservation of the building, the historic preservation of the building.
Yeah.
I just want people to understand that that's kind of, those are kind of the two, as I see, the two general paths is we hang on to it with long-term ground lease. That's complicated. We sell it and take some sort of I don't want to say take a loss because we're not losing, but we're buying the historic preservation of that building.
yeah, the other avenues that I want to discuss, but we don't necessarily need to chase them down too far if that's where the committee's thinking, is there were some comments and inferences in the discussion that on the homework assignment that the town would have a partner and it would be municipally owned and there would be a sharing of cash flow or a responsibility and also on the flip side of that coin, there were a lot of comments that said we need to relieve the burden from the town. And so that is an option too, an honest to goodness joint venture where I know it was discussed last meeting where there are communities that own the building and they employ someone to operate, and it's more of a, that doesn't sound like what you folks want. But if it is, let me know, because that matters a great deal.
So I have a question about outright sale. How much control would the town have over the property if it was an outright sale? Would we be able to say we want some of the property used for soccer fields or some of the rooms available for Girl Scout meetings? I mean, how much can you push this potential investor to meet some of the needs of the town?
It depends, but I would say this is not a particularly high margin transaction. So you're not going to be, this is not like you're approving a master community development plan where there's 1,000 housing units and 1 million square feet of office and there's lots of fat and you can carve out a corner of the parking lot for, your own, bus stop, and you can carve a walking trail and all sorts of other things for municipal use. I don't foresee that as being a huge source in this redevelopment instance, but I would say that one of the things that you're going to ask, because community access and use is at the top of the list of your priorities, according to the survey, that you ask for creative responses to that. I would rather see people come to the table and say, here's what we're willing to do and we think it's creative, rather than you saying, all right, before we even start, we need you to carve out 2 soccer fields. We need you to carve out an office on the first floor that can be used for community meetings. You're now putting barriers in front of yourself that are unnecessary.
I see. Okay. Also, with a sale, doesn't that mean that renovation is less expensive than the town being involved in the prevailing wages issue?
Yes, I'm going to take that one, Brett, because I've been doing public construction for 30 years. So Julian is absolutely correct. Private sector can renovate this building at least 30% less cost than the town of Northborough. If I do it, the town does it, we pay prevailing wages. We have to follow procurement laws, Chapter 149, Chapter 7. These all add not only expense, but time to the process, considerable time. In an ideal world, that's why and no matter how this works out, the town does not want to be the entity that renovates this building. It'll be astronomical.
But you could create a structure where there is a ground lease that separates the operator and the developer, where you would be sort of immune from that. Just owning the land doesn't necessitate having to comply with prevailing wage and all that stuff.
Yeah, if we have to do this work, I don't see any way this would be economically viable in any scenario, if the town is responsible for it. Just the cost, it's already marginal to begin with, if not, in the whole, to add another 30+% to the cost would be a death nail, in my opinion.
Yeah, and it's a double, it's a twofer, because you have to pay more and you have limited access to financing sources. Municipalities, unless they create a particularly costly and aggressive structure, cannot benefit from certain tax credits. Historic tax credits are not available to governments, right? So you've got to find a for-profit partner, and so it becomes a little bit more complicated.
It's
Just so
also got
everybody,
a higher level of risk because it's an existing building, and I guarantee you there are going to be surprises during construction.
No, never.
But I would say tenfold on that particular building. I mean, it's
just so everybody has this information, we made a conscious decision to, when we financed this, that we did not use tax exempt bonds. Because tax exempt bonds, you can't call them for 10 years. And so we have, and the marginal differential in interest rate wasn't much, but we do have that flexibility to be able to call bonds and to sell this without getting encumbered by that factor. And that was done at the beginning by design, just so everybody understands that.
Okay. Well, we've sort of circulated a little bit, and so let me just review the sort of main bullet points of, and I've broken it down. There were about, let's see, 11-ish, 10 or 11 criteria that were discernible from all of your responses. Top of the pile was the restoration and preservation of the structure in any form, whether that was interior, exterior, whatever. The second was to create public access and or a phrase that was used, have a relationship with or to the community, which I think can be really, a developer can get really creative as to how they, or a user can get really creative as to how they propose that arrangement. And I think that's one of the things, and I will say, I should have started with this. One of the things about real estate developers and entrepreneurs and operators that are going to be interested in this project are, they are really good at problem solving and they get really creative. That's what makes them really great. And so back to that public access and utility aspect of it, rather than saying we'd like X, say, how would you address some component of public access, or access to community use, or a relationship within the community? We do not want this thing to be so secluded and cloistered that no one ever has access to it and no one ever gets to benefit from it. And we are the town, that's going to be a criteria that we strongly weigh, is how do you propose to integrate this into the larger community? So it isn't just the white house up on the hill, but rather, something that we all can benefit from. And that doesn't mean we need to be in there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But what do you propose? How would you structure something?
Yeah, it just to kind of follow that, it could be as simple as it opens up as an event center, and under whatever agreement, the town has access to hold our annual winter ball there at little or no cost.
Sure. Yep.
Something like that.
And that can also be something that's, ironed out as the plan and the proposal gets more formal, because we don't know what exactly the thing will look like physically when it's done until we've negotiated a real program, and we've gotten to that point. So some flexibility in there is really good. The number 3 category was reduced municipal burden. And I also just put as economic feasibility, basically something that makes actual sense, right? We're not going to hand something over to somebody that in 2 years they're going to say, oh, we couldn't make it work. Here's this half-built, half falling down building that we tried to make a go of and we couldn't do it. Here's it back again, your responsibility now. So we want to really stress feasibility and sort of reducing that burden of maintenance and operation and risk. There is a lot of risk in that building to be municipally owned. The two that scored less than top tier, but still are significant, I think, out of this are the site, whether that's landscaping or the use of the site, how the land is planned. So some amount of landscape restoration, doesn't have to be formal gardens, but something that makes this aesthetically pleasing. It's a large site in a prominent part of town, needs to be aesthetically pleasing and acceptable to the committee. And then connection with either or both master plan and the downtown revitalization plan. So great opportunity to say in your criteria, we're going to pay particular attention to how you propose to integrate this, not only the property, but the use of the property going forward into the downtown revitalization plan, master plan, any other municipal documents or plans that that are out there. So those are good criteria. And I think if it makes sense to you, I'm going to structure the general program criteria on these 5 bullet points as I start to draft the RFP for review. And then I'm kind of following, there are some sort of admin, I would call them, or boilerplate criteria too. The first is, who are you? What are your credentials? What have you done? Who are your partners? Basically want to underwrite your organization and your proposal, and not your proposal, but your capacity, and understand what is your financial capacity, your capacity to deliver a project, and your capacity to successfully operate this thing into the future. Because it's no good if you can build the thing and then you can't operate it successfully, because then it's a problem again. We're back where we started. So basically, it's an underwriting criteria that lumps in the developer, the operator, the investor, everybody on the team, their experience, their qualifications, and their capacity. One of a project that I worked on previously, that was stressed but not stressed enough, and they didn't understand who they were getting into business with, and the developer turned out he had no assets, he had no capacity, he didn't really have any real experience, or he didn't have enough capital to do a lot of things, and so the deal ended up falling apart as a result. I was involved well before that, and fortunately they didn't keep me on when they wrote the RFP, so oh well.
Brett,
Yeah.
as I've done some similar projects, one of the things that we, as part of that, I think you're covering this, is asking for some financials, some financial wherewithal, being able to understand that they either have the financing or have the ability to obtain the financing to pull this, whatever they're proposing off.
Yeah, and I've got a good checklist. We used to be the third party underwriter for a $1 billion private equity investment firm that did real estate all over the country, and so I've got a really great list of things that I always ask for. And if you're in this business, you're accustomed to putting these things together for financing packages and anything else. And then I consider that criteria 1 is just the underwriting criteria of who these people are and what they're going to do and what they're capable of doing. Then the actual project proposal, which will have those sort of 5 subcategories of here's how we will weigh this proposal, is based on your ability to, your proposal to restore and redevelop, your proposal to increase public or provide public access, to integrate it into the community plan, et cetera, et cetera. And then the final is a project feasibility exercise, which I think is important. It's essential to understand, but at the end of the day, I think it's it's either a thumbs up or a thumbs down. I don't think we as a committee and we as a municipality get into the weeds of underwriting their entire deal structure and how they're going to actually make this thing work. If it makes sense and it's feasible and we can participate in that by plugging some holes in the capital stack and we have some control over what goes on in there. And that's another, someone that had asked about control, I think, Julian. If the town is putting together a TIF, if the town is granting certain soft funds, if the town is providing additional capital benefit in some way, that comes with control. You have the ability to, in an agreement that you draft with the developer or the operator or the team, dig your heels in a little bit on certain fundamental things that you think are important that maybe the easement does not control.
We also have the ability to put a reserve on this, a minimum of, if we're going to sell it, we expect to get 500,000 back in cash, So I'll give you an example of this. We put an RFP out to surplus our old fire station on 13, the real old one on 13 Church Street. We put all these criteria in place in the RFP. Has to blend with the master plan, what we'd like to see, what we don't want to see. And then we put a minimum on what we would accept for the value of the parcel. And it's below market value, but not nothing. So that's another option for us to look at as well. Putting a reserve on it doesn't have to be zero or full price, or you can leave it to them to propose. One of the criteria could potentially be how much they're willing to pay the town for the parcel and still deliver that proposal. So not to muddy the waters too much here. I know Brett's going, please don't put any more constraints on this.
No.
But it's not unreasonable for the town to say, we want a little bit of skin in the game. We want 250,000 of our money back, because then we can use it for potentially to support the building.
I think that's totally fine.
Do something else.
If you really wanted to get complicated, you could put some trigger mechanism in that says, we'll give you the thing for a deal right now, but in 30 years, if you recapitalize and sell this thing and do a big cash out and the developers all go to, Bermuda for the winter, we get a slice of that. It happens a lot I do some negotiating of contracts for the city of Boston and all the BPDA owned land. They do that 99-year ground lease, and we give it to you for a very modest fee, but when you build the thing and in 10 years, when you do a recapitalization, we get 1.5% of positive proceeds. I think that's a little bit unnecessary, because I think what you really get is the benefit of getting this thing back out on the street and eventually creating economic and tax benefit. But there are opportunities.
I mean, the state structure to deal like
it makes people feel like we're not just giving this thing away and we're not getting anything for it.
The state structured a deal like that with the town of Westboro for the land over at the hospital, the old Westboro State Hospital. They got a deal on the property. The town of Westboro then develops it, and then the state will take a cut of whatever they get from that development. But what the town gets in that deal is being able to decide what they want to see developed on the site, and they can control that. The state still gets something back in the future. So it's not a windfall for the town of Westboro.
Right.
So in this case,
Right. Yeah.
I mean, there's so many variables to this, and that's why I think we need to be clear about what we're asking for.
Great. Okay. So does that make sense to everyone, or does anyone have any additional thoughts or ideas about those criteria? I think, just to give you an idea, I think what I shared with you, the three different three different flavors of evaluation criteria. I think what works probably best for this is a blend of, let's not get too crazy with excruciating detail on every single point, but give plenty of guidance so that somebody understands, okay, I know generally speaking what they're looking for. I think that just 5 bullet points and say, well, we'll figure it out when we're reviewing it, is not a great idea, but also being incredibly detailed sometimes can be too confusing and too onerous for a respondent to come back and say, all right, I think I understand exactly what they're asking for, but I think we want to give ourselves a little bit of flexibility. So nothing too onerous, but certainly more than just a quick and dirty.
So Brett, under criteria number 3, reduced municipal burden, is that where you'd work in something in terms of either potentially a reserve or one of the criteria being what's financially, in the best interest of the town, how much of our investment we might potentially recoup?
Yeah, so I think that's an opportunity to say, okay, that could very well be, we'll pay you for the site, for the property, a certain amount of money. That reduces the outlay, a cash outlay that the town has had to come up with. It could be a sharing program. It could be a tax program. It could be any number of different structures that are either today immediate in a capital kind of a jolt of cash to the town for exchange for the building versus
it could be as simple as we've paid off half of the cost of the acquisition, or about 60% of the cost of the acquisition. The proposer takes over the remaining debt, so the town gets out from under the burden of outlaying any further money other than what we've invested.
Yep. Like I said, we want these guys to get creative. I don't know that any of you are real estate developers. I don't think we are. I am not a real estate developer. If I were, I'd probably make a lot more money than I do, and I'd be, much better equipped to solve complex problems in the world of the built environment. But that's where we want to poke these guys. We want to get them thinking about how they can creatively solve this problem, because these are not going to be easy problems to solve.
So I was interested in talking about the first bullet point, the restoration and preservation. I'm not a big fan of a partial or restoration light. I like to speak on behalf of the Weston Mansion and the fact that it is a unique specimen of the shingle style. And what makes it unique is that it embodies many of those characteristics, like the living hall and the continuous shingles on the outside, the banks of windows, the use of porches and verandas to let the interior and the exterior spaces connect. There's a lot of components that if we don't restore those, you really aren't going to get the sense of the uniqueness of this piece of architecture. So that's why I strongly emphasize that the degree of restoration we need to talk through and be clear about. And if we can't do an adequate restoration, like removing those 60s additions and taking off the white paint and possibly restoring the conical towers, I don't know how much of a value is left if you don't really have the fabric of the building to appreciate.
Sort of along parallel to that, I agree with what you're saying. I'm also interested in understanding what type of sustainable approach a developer would have on this. And I think that some of that language could go into that. It's very much all wrapped up in, whatever they are proposing to do to the building. I know that's not, doesn't really help with their costs in some cases, but is that, Brett, have you done that before? I'm not saying it has to be a net zero renovation, but.
Yeah, and so one of the things is, if we can do, there's a sort of highly advantageous, neutral, we can also attribute a point system. And if we decide, as you decide as the committee, that you will give points to proposals that incorporate significant thought and levels of sustainability, significant thought and attention to restoration of these historic bits, and the fabric and the feel and everything else, all of the things that are important to this structure that make it worth looking at and being in and talking about. then we can do that as well. That's certainly I think the bullet point number one of the restoration is going to be the most thought is going to have to be put into that to kind of set the barometer for, all right, what does that mean? What is restoration of the historic components? And to some degree that will be, one would hope, tied to some of the standards. If this is going to be a candidate for historic tax credits, we've got some reliance on what goes into that exercise as well. But yeah, I think, Tom, you're absolutely right. And thinking about specific things that we can point to would be tremendously helpful. If there are particular bullet points that you can share about, you just rattled off a handful, the removing the white paint and the stained glass windows and the fenestration in general, et cetera, that would be helpful to kind of start to think about what are actually the actual physical observable things that we can point to say we're really focused on this, and we, if you're not going to pay attention to that, we're not going to give you many points, or we're not going to look very favorably upon your proposal.
If I may, my understanding is if the property wants to be put on the National Register because of the tax breaks and the like, then the requirements for restoration aren't going to be driven by us. It's going to be driven by the Mass Historic Commission and the like. For example, after a year and a half, I'm trying to put my house on the National Register, and after a year and a half, we just got the Mass Historic Commission comments on the property and how much more work we have to put into it to get it on the National Register. And this is just an old home. At some point, I think we need to communicate in some detail with Mass Historical Commission to, they sent us a letter, but I think we need some details about what exactly has to be done, and I think they're going to drive this, especially if somebody wants to use the tax breaks. So that was one thing. Slightly different topic that I wanted to mention earlier is when we started the meeting, I had a question: is what is this project? Because it wasn't clear to me. And John, you made a good point. I think you helped clarify it. You want to bring the building, the mansion, back to a functioning facility. And just to make sure we know that that's not Preservation Light. Read it in detail, and Preservation Light is not that. Preservation Light was to get it ready for marketing. And the thing that's not clear to me is this 2 big phases? So hypothetically, we can fix up the mansion, we get it ready, it's its own unique function facility. But when we had these other plans put in place, there were plans to possible putting in housing on the property or other things like that. Is this something that would be considered years from now? It doesn't seem to be this is part of what we're talking about right now. So I'm trying to understand if those are off the table, or those are off the table for now. Because remember, there were 3 other versions of possibilities for the property, and one that might make sense now is the brand new function room, because the old function room might have to come down. So anyway, I'm trying to get my head around the other options for the use of the property, and to be honest, I think at least 2 or 3 acres of that property could be sold off as housing to someone to build some kind of housing on it that we just wash our hands from it. We certainly could use the income. But that's, I never crunched numbers for it. That's just an opinion at this point.
That's a really good point, Norm, and it's something that we've been focused on, and all of the information kind of leads to hospitality as the use, but it's not exclusive, right? And that's a good question to ask the committee. If a proposal came in that said, we'd like to do housing or use this as a multi-use facility, it does, has a cultural component and a housing component, or whatever, how would you respond? We want to know that before we ask those questions, or we ask for the proposals rather. if a housing, if a housing solution came on to came in through the RFP process, would you say no, or would you consider it? That is a good way to refine where are we going with this? How do we ask for what we want if we haven't quite decided what we don't want? And my assumption has always been, from the discussions we had at the interview process, and thus has been that you'd be willing to consider just about anything. And you're not going to restrict yourself to just a single use profile, but rather you would entertain a proposal sort of based on the metrics that we've discussed, regardless of what the actual end use is, whether that be for entertainment or for hospitality or for housing or for office or for whatever creative use that comes through the process.
I think the conversations that we've had as a community was about preserving the streetscape, but there's a lot of, to Norm's point, there's a lot of land up in the back. Frankly, I wound up spending, $10,000-$15,000 to remove oak trees that crashed through people's yards, and I didn't even realize that the White Cliffs property, carried up into that back area there. There's a lot of land up there. It's just wooded. But I think maybe something we work in is, we want to preserve the streetscape view, but so in other words, you don't want a big building in the front of White Cliffs, right?
Okay.
I mean, that was the issue with what, someone was proposing to put, a commercial building in the front, of that structure potentially. And my sense from the community was that's not, want to preserve the streetscape, but we're open to the balance of the property being developed in a sensitive enough manner that would complement the existing historic structure.
Is there a, and I think I probably have asked this before, but I can't remember the answer. Is there a site survey that has been done on this property at all to understand what the remainder of that land looks like from a topographical and just a physical area?
Yeah, I mean, we have a plot plan. I would have to look back, to be honest with you. As part of the purchase and sale, I'm sure there was a survey that was done. Let me check.
That'd be great. Because when we have conversations with people, it would be nice to say, hey, also, by the way, a lot of land back here. We haven't, surveyed it entirely, but here's the plans we have. And, there's
actually, you know what? We did pay DBVW to do that, because I remember it was about $11,000 to have that.
Wonderful.
We do have a site survey.
Okay, well, so let's get that.
It should be right in the DBVW report. It's probably an electronic version somewhere of it.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if you've got a standalone high res version, that would be terrific, because we want to include that in the data room when we go out to RFP anyway. So
Brett, they also did a complete bit mapping of the interiors and exteriors digitally.
okay,
So you have the quite detailed information on the interior finishes and the exterior.
Sean, can you
Because-
kind of go through some of the information we've got and see if you can't find that, get your hands on that survey?
Yeah, I'll take a look.
Thank you. I'm sure we have it.
that is an alternative funding source, right? That's a place to plug holes if you've got a great proposal that and a team that can effectively either subdivide or bring on another partner to develop a portion of the land that provides capital benefit to the White Cliffs property. That's a good thing, I think. Okay, terrific. Any other questions, comments? I think what my conclusion on deal structure is that the town would be willing to entertain a long-term ground lease and a fee simple sale subject to conditions or restrictions, but we're not really saying we're excluding any one particular structure. So I think that's good. But we don't want to be in the business of owning and operating this thing as a going concern. So
if someone can give me the sharing, I have the landscape information in front of me, so it might be easier for Sean to find it. Diane, can I share? Let's see.
Um,
Can anybody see that?
It's coming.
All right.
Yeah.
So,
Hey, there we go.
Sean, that's what you're looking for. It'd be great to find a digital copy of that. That's right out of the report.
Yeah, I'm sure it's in our main file.
Yeah, you must have it.
Yeah, I'm going through the main file now. I'm sure I'll find it shortly.
All right, so that's what you're looking for.
Having an air raid?
Yeah, it's fine. I mean, if I mute it, I think you won't hear it, just me.
Okay. I think if no one has anything else, that's what I've come to discuss. And I shared, it's attached here, and I think it was attached. I shared a sort of a project timeline that I think is probably helpful for everybody to understand where we are and what we're doing. And there's a lot of, it's a pretty aggressive schedule. So there's some fudge factor or wiggle room baked into it that will probably push that chart down the line a little bit as we get closer. You know, it basically assumes that we all agree on a particular date and there are no follow-ups. So if there are, we'll just scoot it down. And I think there's about 2 months at the end of the calendar of wiggle room. So I think it's an aggressive schedule, but I think it gives us the flexibility to continue to be thoughtful about this and not have to rush anything. Anybody have any questions for me? Or comments or criticisms or?
I like what you're doing, Brett.
Well, I like doing it, so hopefully that helps. I'm not trying to take, Todd, your chairmanship away, but the last thing that I was talking about was meetings with municipal officials. I had reached out to John and others to start the process of, I'd like to get back to the site so I can at least refamiliarize myself with I'd like to walk the site while it's still nice out and I can actually walk around and understand the topography and the parameters of the site, but also to kind of have some conversations with people and groups that are that need to be talked to in advance.
So Brett, do you want to be placed on the agenda for like the planning board, municipal, the master plan implementation committee, maybe selectmen? Like, do you just want to, we want to work to schedule you to
That's
just
fine.
meet with them face to face, or do you want them to provide their thoughts through another venue, or?
I think meeting face to face is a good option.
And do you want to do that before you have a draft of the RFP, or do you want to provide them with the RFP and ask for their thoughts on it?
No, the
Prior.
former. Yep.
Okay.
And the structure of the municipal government boards and commissions better than I do. But if there's a historic district commission, or if there is a historic, what is the name of it's the historic.
The local historic district.
District commission.
District commission. There we go. Any and all, I'm willing to make my schedule pretty available.
Yeah. So Lori can talk to you about getting you the planning board. I could talk to you. The next selectmen's meeting is on the 12th, and September 12th, and then September 26th. So those are two quick dates coming up. Norm, I don't know what you have for the historic district commission.
We're looking for early September.
Yeah.
For our next meeting.
So Brett, if you want to let me know the 12th or the 26th, either of those work for you. I'll talk to the chairman of the board to get you to come in. He's
Okay.
actually looking for an update on White Cliffs anyway, so the timing is good.
Their evening, presumably.
Yes, by the selectmen or by Zoom,
Okay.
as are the planning board.
Okay. I will look at my calendar. That's probably fine, but perhaps later in the agenda. I bear with me a second. 12. Yeah. What time are their meetings? Do you know off the top of your head?
Typically start at 7 o'clock.
Oh, that's
But
perfect.
there
All
may
right. I was gonna
be-
say, I've got I teach in the late afternoons on Mondays, so 5 o'clock or so, but I'll be out by 7. Up by 6:30.
We usually have hearings scheduled right at the 7 o'clock hour, but
Perfect. That's
so you
great.
probably come a little further down.
That's
Yeah.
great. Okay, and I will, and it's, connect me with whoever you need to connect me with. And I'll reach out to Lori as well.
So then the question becomes, what will we need for a next meeting if you're going to, do we want to meet while you're doing that, or we want you to go through and meet with the planning board, selectmen, historic district, and then come back to us?
Yeah, I think you can, I've got a good amount of work to be doing now. It's sort of, the floodgates are open. As I'm drafting this draft RFP, I'm going to be speaking with interested parties who have contacted the town, and I'm going to start poking around to find people to give them the heads up on the RFP and municipal officials. So I know that I'm going to have a tremendous amount to share until I've sort of gotten through that process, but I'm happy to do whatever.
So what would make sense for our next meeting through the chair?
Do we need to meet for the sake of meeting until there's a deliverable? I don't see one.
Yeah, I mean, Brett's gonna need to speak to the other groups, and then when we have a draft of an RFP to start talking about.
Yeah, so I've
Excellent.
got the draft RFP September 1st is sort of a placeholder where I'll have something for you to consider and give comment on. So if you want to schedule something shortly after that, I can speak to, we can continue to work on the particulars of the RFP.
So the week of September 5th?
Yeah, that's fine. Yep.
Okay.
The 5th is Labor Day, so any day aside from that, I guess makes sense.
So how about do we want to stay with a Thursday meeting, or the 7th or the 8th? Or I'm actually good on the 7th or the 8th. September 7th or 8th.
I'm fine either of those days.
As am I.
I prefer the 8th, because that's the 7th is the date we're planning to have the next commission meeting. That's Historic District Commission meeting.
Perfect. And so why don't we settle on Thursday, the 8th, 2 p.m.?
Sounds good.
Oh, if it's at 2, it can be 7 or 8. I almost prefer the 7th if it's at 2 o'clock. Yeah, I keep thinking it's night. Yeah. So how about if we do the 7th at 2 o'clock?
Does that work for everybody?
That's fine.
No, not for me, but I'm just one person.
Yeah, but Julianne, if the 8th works for everybody
No, I understand.
and the
Yeah.
7th doesn't work for you, we can do the 8th.
Neither actually work for me, so go ahead.
So the 7th then? Will you make it or be able to not make it on the 7th, Julianne?
Probably not.
Can you make the 8th at 2 p.m.?
I'm going to be traveling, so
Oh, okay. Okay. Do we want to push it off a week then?
it's fine. It's fine with me. I can catch up on YouTube if everybody else can. September's going to get busy, so
Yeah. Okay. So then we're back to the 8th at 2,
Well, I was hoping for the 7th.
the 7th at 2. Either one's fine with me. Whatever makes you happy, Norm.
Well, I'd rather kill Monday with meetings than 2. Yeah, I'm
What's that?
tired. I'm trying to juggle stuff.
I have a question and I'd like to go through Lori on this one. So we identified 3 boards and committees that it would be great to have Brett come to, but MPIC, the Master Plan Implementation Committee, was mentioned about a half an hour ago. What do we think about that?
Yeah, I mentioned it. I think that would be worthwhile. It's because of the downtown. The Master Plan Implementation Committee is working on the downtown master plan vision. So, I mean, you're gonna hit, they're all the same people from the Board of Selectmen, the Planning Board. I mean, it's all kind of the same folks, but it might be worth touching base with them.
I think that's great.
Okay.
I would much rather talk to everybody I can in advance than to in 2 months say, hang on a minute, we never got to share a very important detail about this or something. So that's fine.
Okay. All right, so we can loop them into. I'm sorry, I just want to confirm. I wrote it down 3 times and scratched it out. We're September 7th at 2 p.m.
Yes.
Okay, September 7th, 2 p.m. it is by Zoom.
Okay, and I will at some point in the next day reach out to John, you, and Lori to
Yep, just let me the 12th or the 26th, whichever works for
Yeah.
you, Brett.
and maybe there's a
And I need to-
talk Yep.
Yeah, I'll talk to you offline about a couple other items.
Terrific.
All
Well,
right.
thank you all very much.
Thank you, Brett.
So I absolutely have a hard stop at 3:30. So is there any other business so we could wrap up here in a few minutes, or are we done?
I'm good.
I only have one question. At the last meeting, Sean, the power was onto the dehumidifiers, but they weren't running yet. Is everything up and running now in the mansion?
Yep, everything's up and running. I was in there yesterday, just checking it with the high humidity we've had lately. And it's maintaining 45% humidity on the first and second floor. So it's working as we had hoped, which is great.
Thank you.
Do I hear a motion? To adjourn, in case it wasn't clear what I was looking
So
for.
moved.
I'll second it.
All right. Norm,
Yes.
Diana,
Yes.
Julianne,
Yes.
Tom,
Yes.
and I vote yes as well. Thank you, everyone.